What's up, you guys? My name is Joseph, and today we're going to be reviewing Nickel Boys, a movie that premiered last year in festivals and just recently came out into theaters. As you can see, I am being so brave, standing out here in the freezing cold temperatures of Austin, Texas. Last night we had a massive snowstorm, the likes of which haven't been seen in maybe even 3 years. And as you can see, currently we have, in some places there's like an eighth of an inch of snow. Whoa, hey, wait a minute. Oh, would you look at that? Isn't that kind of cool? How'd he get up there? Well, that was just magical. That was lovely. But no, seriously, I mean, there was a ridiculous amount of snow. I mean, it's hard to believe, honestly. But anyways, as I was saying, this is going to be a video review of Nickel Boys. I am going to continue with the unscripted nature that I used in my Brutalist review. I got pretty good feedback on that, so it seemed like it was working pretty well with people, so we're just going to keep on rolling with it. As I did with the Brutalist review, I'm going to start this off with a non-spoiler section, which I think I'm just going to go ahead and dive into right now. So, in terms of my general thoughts and opinions on the content and the execution of this movie, one of the biggest draws of this movie was its very unique style of cinematography, wherein basically the entire movie is in first person. And it was interesting. I mean, obviously, it's a technical feat. It was very impressive what they were able to accomplish and how they were able to tell such a cohesive story without being able to let you ever step outside of what the characters would actually be seeing, especially considering they flip-flop back and forth between the two main characters' perspectives. I will admit, though, that I did find that presentation to be a little challenging. It's tough because I can see, absolutely, thematically what it's trying to do. It is literally putting you in the head of the characters. It is saying you are going to live this experience right alongside them, as them, through them, basically. It's a genius idea. As I said, I will admit, though, that it was a little challenging throughout it's a fairly long film, throughout the entire runtime, to not want to be able to take a step back, or sometimes things were a little bit, I don't want to say confusing, because it was never like I couldn't grasp what was going on, but it was more so like just this kind of pervading feeling of maybe it would have been better to see something from a different perspective. I don't want to come off as a hater, because I do think it was really impressive and, again, thematically relevant. But it was just something that I personally did struggle with. Beyond the cinematography, obviously the content of this story is incredibly important. This movie was adapted from a book which came out a few years ago by the same title, Nickel Boys. And I guess I should have started with this, but the basic premise of this story is that a young African American during the Jim Crowe era gets sent to a boarding school. And then the main part of the story happens in this boarding school, where we see the main character, Elwood, and his one real friend that he makes there, Turner. We follow their experiences as they kind of try to navigate the insane atmosphere of the school, which is one of prejudice, of segregation, of bigotry, of abuse. And basically throughout the movie, we can see that not only is this school in general kind of trashy and archaic in the way that it deals with disciplining children, it is also shown that it is incredibly more dangerous and more evil for people of color. Obviously, very heavy subject matter, but very important subject matter, and it's all tackled in this just super heartbreaking and almost numbing kind of way, where the main character comes with this optimism that is continually just beaten down in ways that he can't even comprehend, because he's he's a pure and wholesome person who doesn't understand how people can be so evil and can be so cruel without any kind of second thought, basically, and questioning the whole system on how this can even be possible. That is all very interesting and a very important story. The performances might have been, honestly, my favorite part of this whole movie. Elwood's, I think that he just calls her kind of Nana throughout the film, played by Anjanou Ellis-Taylor, is like the heart and soul of this film. You can see how she's trying to be strong, how she's trying to maintain this image of positivity and optimism to relay onto Elwood, but that she understands very deeply that at any day this optimism could be her undoing. Other things that I can get into vaguely for the non-spoiler section, there was a very interesting editing style to this movie where they used a lot of archival footage. I don't know if it was stock footage, but just like it would cut away to things that were non-diegetic but were basically just supplementary to the story that we were getting, but giving a more historical context, which I thought was very interesting. Again, it kind of tying in with earlier talking about the presentation with the cinematography. It was all stuff that I can understand the purpose of why it was there. I mean, obviously hearing radio broadcasts from the time, or seeing police reports, missing persons reports, all is like very clearly tying in with the story. But it was, again, this thing where it felt a little bit like it made me sometimes realize that I was watching a movie, I guess is the best way to put it. It made it less immersive, which I think is something that I would say I might have felt for the style of cinematography as well, is that at certain points, rather than like maybe just always feeling like I was following the story, I was like, oh, I'm following a movie that is doing these things. That's kind of a vague way to put it, but that makes sense in my head. Other than that, I feel like mostly everything else that I can really say we would have to dive into spoilers for, so yeah, let's just go ahead and do it. Spoiler section starting now. Spoiler time. Let's get into spoiler time. Okay, spoilers. I guess let's start with more diving into the presentation of this movie. So there was an interesting way that they structured this film where for a very long time you are strictly in this first-person mode following Elwood as he goes through his life chronologically. Then at some point in the movie, we cut to what we assume is Elwood in the future, looking back on his experiences and recontextualizing them and doing research on the school that he went to and seeing if there's any information about like the missing persons and following very closely the story of like, well, more human remains were found on site of this school. Gee, that kind of sends a very specific message of what was going on here. It's kind of similar, if any of you have seen After Sun, to that movie, in the sense that there's this main story where everything is kind of happening in real time, and yet then there's also this element of the main character then looking back on it and recontextualizing things and trying to get a bigger picture of what was going on. I brought this up as the first thing because it all ties into the presentation of the film, which I said at the beginning I found to be a bit challenging. I don't know. I want to preface all of this by saying that this is still an excellent movie, and not even one of those movies where I'm just like, well, I appreciate it more than I like it. Like, I did really like this movie. It's kind of tough because when I think about the content of this film, there's nothing that I can critique, and yet I have a conflicted view on the movie itself because of those ways that the story was presented. I just felt like the cutting back and forth was... It sometimes felt a little arbitrary, or even the exact opposite. It was very on the nose, where it was like momentum breaking at points, where it's like, I kind of want to just see the story play through all the way without like having to like see the future and then looking back and then him being like, man, there was a lot of problems going on here because, well, you know, we were already seeing all of those problems take place. I don't know. The more I'm talking, the more I'm realizing I'm sounding really like down on this movie, which is not how I wanted this review to sound. But yeah, I don't know. The presentation overall was something that challenged me a little bit. But let's move on to the story itself, honestly, which is really, there's no other word to describe it other than heartbreaking, honestly. So getting into the actual story itself. This was a very painful and anger-inducing and frustrating story, obviously. I thought that seeing how Elwood's personality and perspective was blocked at every turn by the ways in which society was run were devastating. I mean, he's someone who genuinely cannot believe why people could harbor such hatred. And why the world would be okay with letting those kinds of thoughts dictate the manner in which things operate. I can't remember specifically, but there's a few scenes in this where Elwood is talking to Turner and he says, I think this is how things should be, and so this is how I'm going to behave. And Turner is basically like, dude, no, like, you're not helping yourself by doing that. The best thing you can do is basically put your head down and survive. You shouldn't be coming at this from an angle of thinking you can ever possibly change something. How can you be so stupid as to believe that you should actually act on what is right? And it's not like Turner believes that himself, but he's been led to believe that through his experiences. And you feel that pressure that's on them, that's like pushing them down, being an obstacle at every turn when all they want is a bit of peace and of freedom. It's truly just awful. There's not really any other way to describe the feeling that the movie gives you. I thought that there were a lot of subplots that were super poignant. The one, I don't remember his name, but like the one white friend that they have who's like, well, okay, maybe he's kind of seemingly a decent guy, and maybe, like, even though Turner is pretty jaded, he made this friend. He clearly knows that he can cross these boundaries, or that you can cross these boundaries and kind of get people to open up. But also, again, as the movie goes on, you see, no, this dude is actually also a racist piece of ish who, at the very best, doesn't really want to do these awful things, but doesn't want to go against the system that perpetuates these awful things, and is just as implicated as anyone else who's just a part of the system. And that's another thing the movie does well, is like showing how these systems remain in place by putting you in a boarding school. They show a setting in which your family's not here. All you have for, role models and for teachers and for caretakers are these horribly racist, disgusting people who will punish you for stepping out of line even on the slightest, and will also punish you even harder if you're a person of color who steps out of line. And it's a perfect setting to represent the emotion and the theme, I guess, that this movie is trying to get at. Just the scene where Anjanou Ellis-Taylor's character tries to come and see Elwood but is denied the ability to do so. They're literally keeping the family apart because they don't want anyone to know what's going on here. They're so afraid and so aware of what they're doing that they basically double down and restrict freedom. I mean, it's modern day slavery. Their entire education is working from dusk till dawn, and that's how they reform themselves. Oh, the twist reveal. The twist reveal. Okay, so I was a little confused by the ending of this film when, the whole time we've thought that it was Elwood who was the one who survived and was looking back on these things, and then at the end we see Elwood as the one who gets shot. And so I kind of just assumed, okay, I guess Turner started going as Elwood, and I looked it up afterwards, and that is what happened. So again, maybe in the book, this all was kind of more, I don't know, I don't want to say was all more relevant, but more impactful. I thought it was an interesting twist. I didn't really see it coming, but it kind of changes the messaging of the film a little bit. Not to say that the film is like punishing Elwood for being an optimist, but rather than showing that someone's optimism can truly save them and give them the life that their optimistic outlook warrants, it more so turns into, at the very end, this story of you can be the most perfect person and the most wholesome person and you'll still be shot for no reason, which is clearly that is the message the movie wants to give, and it's not an incorrect message at all. It's just a different message than the more hopeful outlook. And so I thought it was a really interesting twist, especially since it came really right at the end. I guess I don't really feel too strongly one way or the other, but it is just like, it did just switch up the messaging to this this sad story where it's basically Turner just has to almost, he's not doing all of this now out of guilt and out of shame, or obligation, but it is this thing where it's like, there's that level of he's doing this and he's not stopping because the person that he learned this optimism from wasn't able to experience it for themselves, wasn't able to experience freedom for themselves again, which is again just a super depressing plot point in the movie. The main teacher was a piece of crap. Enough said there. He was effectively annoyingly evil. There's this scene where he's like obviously drunk out of his mind, whipping his students. And it's just this like horrible, it's a scene that feels absolutely horrible because it's like, okay, even you realize that what you're doing is disgusting, and yet you're trying to convince yourself so hard that it's right and that you should be allowed to do this, and yet you know that you had to get ridiculously drunk in order to be able to process this and go through with it. And it's just this terribly disgusting scene. The subplot about the lawyer who ends up taking the money and running. There's just a lot in this movie that is thrown at Elwood and at Hattie that pushes against their outlooks on the world that makes this movie as affecting as it is. But yeah, other than that, I don't have a whole lot more to say about this film. I hope you guys don't mind the shorter review for this one. Most of my reviews will tend to be about as long as this. I was really shocked that the Brutalist one was as long as it was. But yeah, that's what I got for you guys today. I hope you were either enticed to go out and see this movie or felt like you got some new insight or a new opinion on something that you hadn't heard before. I would encourage everyone to go out and see this film. I think it is one of the best of 2024. And yeah, coming up soon, I have a review of the SZA movie, as well as a list of my favorite movies of 2024 and a Micro Budget Mondays. Please like, subscribe, comment, and stay tuned for what I have coming next. Bye, guys.